Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of AZ Illustrated Politics, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national affairs. On tonight's show, President Barack Obama goes to Congress to get approval of a military strike against Syria and finds an ally in Senator John McCain. Plus, the Tucson City Council races are heating up. What will we see in the upcoming campaign season? And the Forest Service says the Rosemont mine will have little effect on waterways, but the EPA appears to disagree. All that and more coming up next on AZ Illustrated Politics, but first, a look at today's top stories.
Pima County is asking Freeport-McMoRan to make sure it doesn't allow dust to escape from the company's mining site south of Tucson. The county issued a notice of air quality violation to Freeport-McMoRan after winds picked up dust from the site this summer. The small dust particles were noticeable to nearby residents who complained to the county. After research, Pima County's Environmental Quality Department determined the company had not taken enough preventative measures to ensure dust didn't leave the mining site. Freeport-McMoRan has the next 3 weeks to respond to the county with a plan to prevent future air quality violations. U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan is planning a visit to Tucson next week. The trip is part of a Southwestern education tour to highlight the importance of early childhood education and the impact comprehensive immigration reform could have on education. Duncan will visit Tucson Unified School District's bus depot and ride to a local school. He'll also visit Sunnyside High School and learn how technology is improving academic results in that district. At a town hall yesterday, U.S. Senator John McCain faced opposition to the president's proposed intervention in Syria, but other topics also came up. Members of the audience asked McCain about immigration and the war on drugs. He says if the demand for drugs did not exist, neither would the supply. McCain says the country is moving toward legalizing marijuana and went so far as to say maybe that should happen. Those comments mark a change from McCain's public previous stance on legalizing marijuana. And that's a look at today's headlines.
President Obama ran into surprisingly stiff opposition from key world leaders to his plan for a military strike on Syria.
We get an update on the fight for support abroad and votes here at home as the Senate formally introduced a bill to use military force.
Then the worrying side of the jobs picture in the U.S. Paul Solomon digs into today's employment figures.
Your emails, online bank transactions, and more. Privacy tools keep all of that data secure, but Hari Srinivasan dissects new revelations saying the NSA can crack those codes.
And we return to Syria, starting with 2 looks at its impact on the Middle East. Ray Suarez reports on the flood of refugees in neighboring Jordan.
And Margaret Warner is on the ground in Egypt.
Plus, Mark Shields and David Brooks analyze the debate over military action.
And Gwen Ifill gets historical perspective on how past presidents flexed their war powers.
That's all ahead on tonight's NewsHour.
Tonight on Arizona Week, how are Arizonans planning to implement the Affordable Care Act? And will it work?
People will say, well, we could just keep doing what we're doing. And we certainly could. The question is that a financially sustainable kind of model?
On the whole, it's going to be a net negative. And you don't mess with a whole system, you don't harm a whole system to help the few. And that's what this has tried to do.
That's tonight at 8:30 on PBS 6.
Earlier this week, President Barack Obama announced he'd seek congressional approval for a military strike in Syria following the use of chemical weapons in that country's civil war. Arizona Senator John McCain emerged as one of the president's chief allies this week, saying that not moving forward with the strike would be catastrophic to the nation's credibility. Joining to talk about the drums of war, Attorney Jeff Rogers, former chairman of the Pima County Democratic Party, and Tucson Tea Party founder Trent Humphries. Thanks to both of you guys for being here. Trent, John McCain out front and center in this effort to drum up congressional support for a strike against Syria, and he actually said the president wasn't going far enough. What do you think about the John McCain this week?
John McCain just all over the board. He's working hard in his quest to become the most reviled politician in America. And even if you're for the strike, I can't imagine that you're looking at John McCain saying, well, you keep saying that, John, because you're really helping get things done. I mean, he just, every day it's a new thing for him. He says that he votes for the resolution, even though it says it doesn't really go far enough. And then he says it doesn't go far enough, and if it, then we need to have more teeth to it. Then he just said today that if President Obama actually puts troops in the ground, he should be impeached. I mean, he's just all over the place. He doesn't know what the strategy is. He doesn't have a strategy, and if you don't have a strategy, you can't be sending our men into war.
Jeff, what do you think about McCain's actions this week?
Well, he came out, like Trent says, he was real strong at the beginning, like we have to do this. And then he said he was going to vote against it. And because, as I said, it wasn't strong enough, he wanted more intervention. And then he voted for it in the committee. And then, as he said today, he said, oh, well, if he does put boots on the ground, that would be impeachable. So he really is all over the place. And there are some really good arguments to be made for an intervention here. I mean, we have a 90-year-old treaty that virtually every nation has signed banning these kinds of weapons, even in wartime. And on top of that, this country probably has the third largest stockpile of chemical weapons of any country in the world. Not only do they have chemical weapons, but they also have biological weapons. And they have clearly used them. It's incontrovertible, the evidence that they've used them against their people and killed massive numbers of people. And they've probably used them within the last year 3 or 4 other times where they killed a fewer number of people. So, I think the argument to be made is if we don't stand up, then no one will. And the other argument to be made for this that we're starting to hear from a lot of people is that if we don't do this now, this will just embolden Iran in their quest for a nuclear bomb. And we're placing our chief ally, the only real democracy in the Middle East, Israel, at great risk. And so I think you're going to see the president make a very good argument on Tuesday to the American people and to the Congress that we have to step in and do this, and that it's a measure of what this country stands for. And I think that it's going to be close, though, because there are an awful lot of Republicans who would vote against Obama on anything. There are dozens of Republicans right now in the Senate and the House who have previously said, we need to go in there and do something in Syria right now. And they've said it for months and months, but now that the president has come out and said he wants to do something, they're now against it. And it's just a pure political dynamic and there are some of them who are genuinely opposed to it, because the Republican Party in foreign policy right now is kind of dividing itself in half. You've got the more traditional element that is a little more interventionist and sees America's ability to project its force as something that we ought to do to uphold democracies and do the right thing in the world. And then you've got another element that's breaking off of Rubio and Rand Paul and perhaps Ted Cruz of Texas and some of the others who are now taking a position that's kind of neo-isolationist. And so the Republican parties, and those people I think are genuine in their belief that we should stay out of that. But I think you're seeing a lot of the more traditional Republicans who would vote to do this if there was another president sitting in the president's chair.
I think that's bold, because look, you have one side that's using chemical weapons, the other side is using Al-Qaeda, which has killed more Americans in the past 10 years. This is not a thing where there's a good side and a bad side, just that we don't act now. Acting a year ago or maybe 2 years ago actually might have done some good, because there were still people around that were worth saving. If that group is working with Al-Qaeda, and we know they are, the rebel group, we know they are,
well,
and they admit it. 4 out of the 5 generals.
Right to one extent, some of the rebels are, and that's why.
4 out of the 5 generals.
Well, that's why, as McCain and others, and Lindsey Graham have also come to the president for months and months and said we need to intervene, and the administration has pointed that out. Look, if we help these rebels, some of them, the Free Syrian Army, are kind of on our side. They're liberals, but there are a lot of elements of Al-Qaeda and other jihadist types of people that are against the Syrian government. So it's almost like keeping the status quo is sort of what is maybe the best thing. Nobody's winning. Maybe they'll have to work it out in some kind of negotiated settlement.
And the Iran argument, look, Iran's given us just cause. If we want to pick a fight, if we want to bomb anybody, Iran's in a much better way to go, because they've actually did things that have attacked our interest and killed our soldiers over the past few years. Now, if we have to directly get at them or worried about what they're thinking because we're over here in Syria, that's the wrong way to go. Look, we have plenty of reasons to go after Iran if that's what we need to do, other than just have this kabuki dance of killing people in Syria just to make sure that Iran knows we're serious. And it's just, I don't understand why somebody like Jeff Rogers, who is so in this, could see things so clearly in Iraq, is now all of a sudden, because it's just the opposite. Just because Obama says it's okay, all of a sudden he's a
Well, no,
warmonger.
there's a big difference here. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The Bush administration.
Where's your UN?
The Bush administration misled Congress and misled the American people, and we went into, and that's why the American people are so skeptical of this. They saw that this happened before.
Because George Bush's
now,
fault.
Now, and the American people need to understand this, that we have incontrovertible evidence of weapons of mass destruction. In fact, way beyond the stockpiles of chemical weapons, they have nerve toxins and other kinds of biological weapons that are at their disposal, which are much harder to trace and find once they've been used.
But that's an argument that even President Obama is having trouble making for Democrats. Congressman Grijalva has said he will vote against this. What do you think about Grijalva?
Well, I think there are a lot of traditional liberal Democrats who are going to be a problem here, who are not going to back this and not going to back the president's plan. And I think that strategically, in the long-term interest of this country, they're wrong. And but I just know, many people like Congressman Grijalva are tired of war. They're tired of the U.S. being so imperialistic and throwing its weight around. And I think that there's some truth to that, but this is probably not the time and the place to back up and withdraw.
And Ron Barber has said he's going to listen to both sides and not make a decision. Which way do you think he'll go in the end?
I bet Ron's a very careful guy, and I bet he will look very carefully at the classified. They're offering a lot of classified briefings where they could show the congressmen and senators things that the public can't get to see in a public hearing. And so he's such a cautious, careful guy that he'll probably avail himself of those. And I bet once he does, he ends up supporting it.
And you find yourself on the side of Raul Grijalva on this particular case.
Yes,
and Jeff Flake is voting in favor of the resolution for force.
That was a mistake on Jeff's part. I don't know what he was thinking when he did that. I mean, look, McCain already has a toady in Lindsey Graham. He doesn't need a second one. And I think that, to do it that quickly too. It says, because he was the day before he was saying, well, I need to look at all the facts, and then boom, I'm voted for that. He didn't like tell a story of how he arrived there. He needs to, if he was going to do that, he needed to prep the people a little bit better than just all of a sudden, I'm right there. And in fact, they didn't need his vote. They still would have passed either way. So he could have voted present like the new guy from.
Boy, he's getting a lot of flack. And
he should. That was
Massachusetts.
That was horrible. But going to Ron Barber will do what the Obama administration wants him to do, and it's going to be close enough that they're going to call in that favor. Now, on the upside, that may be the thing that brings him to defeat next time, because I think there are a lot of people who are going to look at that and say, what were you thinking?
Congressman Barber is his own man. He has never once been a lackey of the Democratic Party leadership. He's voted against the leadership on multiple occasions.
When he's given permission to, and he will not be given that permission this time.
I think he's a very independent man who is probably right for that district.
All right, let's shift back here to the local focus. Our city council races are underway. Last week's primary is over, and we touched on it last week. But Trent, looking over the campaign finance reports, it appears that Ben Buehler Garcia is getting a lot of support. He's raised about more than $50,000. He's about $10,000 ahead in private contributions. He hasn't yet applied for the matching funds that Karen Ulick, his opponent, has had. But this was a very close race last time. Councilwoman Ulick defeated Ben Buehler Garcia by fewer than 200 votes. What do you think this
Ben's taken this race very seriously. He's been out working. He's been I'm not sure that up until this point, till this report came out, that Councilwoman Ulich has. I think that you're going to see some panic. That you're going to see her doing a lot more than she has in the past, because she's almost been invisible in a lot of ways. Now, all the things that are happening in the city with the spokespeople, she's not been one of those people. And I think that it's going to cost her. I think she's kind of been caught sleeping a little bit. I think it's been so easy in the past that she thought she could just, which you wouldn't think that would be the case since it was so close last time. But I think this is a race to watch. I think there are a lot of people that aren't going to look at party affiliation. Are going to say, we've made some changes in the city council. Things have gotten a little marginally better. Maybe we need to make some more changes. And I also think that she's also going to learn the difference between the Hispanic community in Tucson and the activist Hispanic community in Tucson. They're not the same thing. I don't think she has a lot of support or contacts in just the regular Hispanic community.
Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I think she's probably the hardest working candidate we've ever had. I'm just amazed at how hard she works. She has a phone bank that's stock full of people every Saturday and every Sunday, and has had for months. I think you got to look at first. Let's talk about the fundraising. 77% of the funds raised by Ben Buehler Garcia came from outside the city limits, whereas 77% of the funds raised by Karen Ulick came from inside the city limits. So who's supporting him? It's not citizens of the city of Tucson.
People who own businesses in the city of Tucson.
It's outsiders. And
People,
the other thing is
outsiders are business owners. That's
also,
what Jeff
you
considers.
also have to look at not only who's contributed to the campaign, but how much they've contributed. Her average donation is like $70. His is in the hundreds. So we're seeing somebody that again is not really representative of the city of Tucson. And I want to take you back to 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was no Green Party candidate in Richard Fiembrecht's race, and he won by about 4,500 votes. Okay, she won only by 200 votes, but 4,400 Green votes were cast. There's no Green on the ballot here. Ben Buehler-Garcia is going to have to work a lot harder to make it close this year.
I think he's been doing that.
In 2009, you still had this ghost of Rio Nuevo, of which no responsibility accrued to Karen Uhlich over that. It was a mess created by prior councils before she was even on them. So, but that specter was hanging over the campaign, and I think that was something tough for her to overcome, and it's not there now.
That downtown was a big issue 4 years ago. Is that still an issue that's going to resonate in this campaign?
I mean, there are other things. Here's the thing: is that when we talk about the trolley, we talk about all the restaurants going on in town. There's a certain percentage of Tucson that gets to participate in those type of things. Tucson's a big city, and there's a lot of people that are hurting so much financially they can't go downtown and eat in the restaurants there. They have a different reality going on right now, and I think Ben Buehler-Garcia is doing a good job of reaching those people and saying we can do things better in this city than what we've done in the past.
What do you think the big issues are going to emerge here?
I think the economy, jobs, business. Like I said, what we like to do at the city council is carve out a certain part of the city. Look, things are going great over there, but all around the rest of the city, things aren't going so great. We're losing a lot of industries. We're losing places where people have went for years.
We have a lower unemployment rate in Tucson than the state. Much lower than the state, and things have improved in this city dramatically in the last 4 years, and Karen Uhlich was one of the people who was responsible for that. I mean, the fact is that this mayor and council over the last 4 years have done a lot of things to make this place more business friendly. Not that it wasn't before, but
that's just I can't believe you say
that
with a straight face.
One of the first things they did was they made it easier for businesses to take over old buildings and change the occupancy standards. So you didn't have to jump through a whole bunch of new hoops in order to put a new business in where an old business was. And there have been multiple things like that make it easier for the businesses to get established. But let's talk about who Ben Buehler-Garcia really is. This is a guy who's a PR firm, has one client. Guess who that one client is? It's Rosemont Copper. Does that ring a bell from back when we had Rosemont Rick Grinnell running for mayor, and his only client was Rosemont Copper? Or does it ring another bell from last year when we had Rosemont trying to take out Ray Carroll with, I think, what's his guy's name, Sean Collins? He was Rosemont's man there too. So I mean, this is, and if you look very carefully at the donations and where they come from, particularly the max donations. Rosemont Copper. So this guy's getting checks from Rosemont Copper for his campaign, and he's their lackey and their PR lackey getting a paycheck.
Ben Buehler-Garcia is an integral part of this community. He's a part of every board. He does things for this community that you could even dream about doing, Jeff Rogers.
Well,
he doesn't crawl up to try to claim credit for those things.
Do you think Rosemont's going to be an issue in the campaign?
I think people are, at least the people outside the extremists have come to this is going to happen. And if it's going to happen, let's embrace it. Let's take those jobs. Let's get that money going through this city. Let's do some good things. I say there's going to be lawsuits. There's always going to be. There's the lawsuit for every reason.
I mean, do you think it'll be an issue in the campaign?
I don't think so.
Is going to be a concern?
Jeff will probably try to make it a campaign, but I think there's a lot of support for Rosemont Copper out there, especially within the city boundaries. I mean, once you get outside the county, further south, people that live around the mine, I think the support kind of fallows. But people want jobs. They want the economy to get better. They want to be able to participate in the downtown, to do things like that. And in order to that, we need jobs. We need good jobs, not just McJobs in Tucson.
And the Rosemont this week, as long as we're talking about Rosemont, the Forest Service came out with its latest report saying they thought the damage in the waterways would be minimal. It looks like the EPA may have a different opinion on that. Jeff, what do you think the status of that is at this point?
Well, the EPA, there's a lawsuit against the state Department of Environmental Quality saying that they shouldn't have issued the water permit to begin with. And the technical problem is that the Forest Service has not, they're treating surface water and groundwater the same way and acting like they're different entities and that they don't mix. Well, the EPA's position and the county's position is that their contamination of the groundwater is likely to then contaminate surface water as well, and that's going to threaten both Cienega Creek, which often runs year-round, and Davidson Canyon, which also has streams that run part of the year and some that run all of the year. And these are two crown jewels when it comes to southern Arizona, beautiful areas. And so, I'm not convinced and never have been convinced that these people won't have a plan that won't contaminate the aquifer. And if they reach a point where they can satisfy people's concerns about the aquifer and contamination of it and of the groundwater and surface water, then the mine should go forward on the law. But I don't believe they've reached that point, and I believe that the State Department of Environmental Quality has been arbitrary and capricious, and they're basically just, signing off on these things without a thorough analysis. And I think the EPA has a very good point, as does the county.
And the EPA is not arbitrary and capricious. We all see that happening all throughout the Obama administration. And we there's things that need to be approved right now that would bring us jobs, that would give us, energy independence, that just aren't happening because the EPA is full of bureaucrats and religious lunatics.
We live in a desert, Trent. We live in a very dry desert. If we contaminate the groundwater, we're in deep trouble here. Very deep trouble.
I get that, but to say that this is a concern that just all of a sudden happened. I mean, this has been addressed. I mean,
and the other thing
they will be monitored. This is not something that we're turning the keys over and it's good.
Let me shift gears here because next week the petitions are due for both the referendum that would block the law that would overhaul our election procedures, as well as the referendum that would reverse the Medicaid expansion. Frank Antonori is on the Medicaid expansion initiative beat. I talked to him this week. He said that he believed that it's going to be close. Trent, do you think he'll have the signatures?
It'll be close. And if he pulls it off, I mean, congratulations. That's one of the most biggest political feats that's ever happened, because the ability to do that, it's almost impossible. To be able to get the signatures you need, even if you paid for them, which Frank's group is not, it's almost impossible to do that. You have to gather, I think, almost
Actually, they received a little bit of a boost from the Tea Party group this last week to help them pay for some.
Yeah,
but probably too little, too late. 87,000
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot
in 90 days.
And I do know that the statewide and the groundswell that he's harnessed has been tremendous. And if he pulls it off, he deserves a medal. I mean,
you think he'll have the signatures?
Well, I think it's going to be close, but I doubt if he's going to have enough signatures. But even if they miraculously do have enough signatures, they've got some serious legal problems. One of the things is that they've been wrongfully told by their legal staff that substantial compliance is all that applies to these petitions, when in fact the law is that it has to be strict compliance. And so one part of the strict compliance is you have to attach a full copy of the bill, as we're doing on the one we're doing on the election bill, to the petition. So theoretically, if the voter wants to look through it and he's got the whole bill there, they're only attaching the part of it that they believe they're challenging, and so that's probably not going to meet strict compliance. The other problem they have is that already we've seen some of their petitions, they're filling in the Tucson, Arizona 85718, that part of it. You can do that on a candidate petition as long as your signature is of the right person and the signature is correct. But you can't do that on a strict compliance petition. So they've got some legal hurdles they're going to have to overcome, even if they are able to get the.
How about this election law overhaul that you're running a referendum on? Is that going to have enough signatures?
We think we're going to have enough to knock off the elections, the voter suppression bill that was passed in the wee hours at the end of the session, and by one vote, a person who switched sides after the first vote had been taken. So I think we've over 130,000 have already been collected, and we've still got a week. So I think we're going to have a pretty good shot at getting this thing on the ballot. The other thing is that we are checking the signatures. So the groups that are pushing this are using our Democrat Party's Voter Action Network, which is our voter file, and they're checking to see which are valid and which are not valid, and they're crossing out signatures that are not valid, that are absolutely positively invalid. And what that means is that when those petitions arrive at the county recorder's office and they try to extrapolate the percentage of signatures that are good and then apply that to the total, the percentage of validity rate is going to be very, very high because we've already vetted them.
Trent, you think they're going to make it?
No, because I spend a lot of time in libraries and places like that. I've been approached once. You know, and usually, like you can tell the ones that are getting there and the ones that aren't. And the person that approached me was obviously a paid person, knew nothing about the issue or the signature. In fact, you know, like I say, it was she spouted off a bunch of things that just sort of simply weren't true about the law. And I would be willing to bet she's not even from the state.
We're doing this door to door to people's houses who are registered voters. This stuff of going to libraries and going to shopping centers and standing on street corners.
Somebody was paying that lady.
That stuff is not the best way to get these. We have some paid circulators who are doing that as well, but the bulk of the signatures are being gathered on a door to door basis by volunteers.
We'll see next week which way this goes, or perhaps after next week. But I want to talk really quickly about these anti-gay flyers out in the Sunnyside School District targeting Daniel Hernandez, the former Gabby Giffords intern who became well known for rushing to her side after she was shot. Congressman Grijalva has called for a federal investigation into these flyers. Trent, is that going too far?
Well, it's disgusting. It happened, and like I say, and we don't know who did it. It was somebody obviously involved in that internecine Democrat battle. But look, there's all kinds of bad, terrible things that happen. We have the Westboro Baptist Church, we have the KKK. There comes a point where you can't make things like that a federal crime. That's because then there is a slippery slope, and that determines when you start doing that. Well, this is a federal crime or that's not. Bad things can happen, and that law will end up being applied in a way that was not meant to be applied. So I guess I think it was horrible, reprehensible. Whoever did that, we should find out who did that, shame them, bring them out in the open, and find out. But to make all of a sudden bring the federal government in here to start regulating what's said and what's not said, as long as nobody's threatened with their life, as long as there's nothing, then even though it's reprehensible, we still have to let that go because we have the First Amendment.
Jeff, you think Congressman Grijalva is going too far by making a federal case out of it?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any federal crime that would have been violated by doing this. It's certainly reprehensible, and I think it was great of Congressman Grijalva to raise the issue. But what I find more interesting about this than anything is how we've changed as a society. The people who would benefit from this, the two people who are being recalled, there was 4 being recalled, but the 2 that would benefit from attacking Daniel Hernandez are running away from this as fast as they can, denying they had anything to do with it. 10 years ago, you might not have seen that happen. 20 years ago, you definitely wouldn't have seen that happen. But instead, you would have seen someone who running from being gay. But now we live in a little bit different society, and an out guy who's gay can be proud of who he is, and the people, as Trent was saying, who've done this should be shamed for doing this, and we now live in a time when that would happen, and I think that's a good thing, and sort of a silver lining to all of this is that's we live in a better place now.
Well, it's certainly an interesting battle between the 2 recall efforts in Sunnyside, and we'll touch on that later. But how about U of A UNLV this weekend, Trent?
Like I say,
are they going to beat the spread here?
I grew up around UNLV, and they've never really had a great football program outside of when Randall Cunningham was there. But every year they step up and they beat somebody they just shouldn't. But that game is not going to be this game. I think the Cats roll.
20 seconds, Jeff.
Arizona's got to win by at least 4 touchdowns. I think they do. I'd like to see some more passing, more productive passing out of them, but they're going to win by a lot. I don't even think UNLV will score.
All right, and I guess we'll find out on Saturday night. Also, the petition challenge for the pension initiative is back on the ballot, but we've run out of time, so we'll have to talk about that next week. Thank you both for being here, and we will be right back with some closing thoughts. That's our show for tonight, but you can learn more about politics by visiting azpm.org or by following us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching another edition of AZ Illustrated Politics.